welcome to YouMeWe Social Impact Group's continued conversation in this 5-part panel series focused on candid conversations to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion at work and beyond. We are honored to produce this event from the traditional territory of the Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island. We are thankful to share in the special spirit of this place, rich in the energy of Mother Earth and ancestors and the love of all creation. The land we stand on belongs to those who lived here before colonization. We know the original residents had their homes, hunting grounds, and forgery spots stolen by settlers who were sponsored, sanctioned, and supported by the colonial system. Recognition and respect are essential elements of establishing healthy relationships, which are vital to reconciliation and to the challenge the legacy of colonialism and its parent patriarchy. Hello, I'm Suzanne Stevens, your host for this meaningful conversation with Indigenous peoples. Before we go any further, I think it's only appropriate that we share space with our Indigenous citizens and give room and energy and the spirit to them. And I'm asking Gary Oker, who is a counselor, to share music with us from his tribe. Gary, I'm going to put you center stage, my friend.
Hello, everyone. My name is Gary Oker. I'm a counselor for Doigiver First Nation. I'm also a songkeeper, passed on to generations. We have history over 12,000 years in our territory here. And these songs come from the Dreamers, not Chene. So here's a song to welcome everyone to the conference here. And in good spirit, we will sing Not Chene.
Thank you so much, Gary, for that beautiful song, all the way from BC. Thank all of you for joining us for live or via recording and being ready to open your mind and your heart en route to understanding. Welcome our panelists. Thank you for agreeing to share your experience, your expertise, and perspectives as advocates, business, and community leaders. And a heartfelt appreciation to our big sponsor, Accelerate Her, as well as wisdomexchangetv.com and YouMeWe Community Women Leading Social Impact for your continued support. I also want to thank the Women and Children's Shelter of Barrie for your continued support, and Sarah, your particular support throughout this process, and Katie's support and your collaboration. It's been a pleasure working alongside all of you, so thank you for that. YouMeWe is honored to host this panel series. It is well aligned with our mandate to maximize leaders and entrepreneurs' meaning and resilience by making their contributions count for them, their organization, and their community. Leaders are empowered as a result to ignite an inclusive culture while having a social, economic, and environmental impact. The strategies that YouMeWe shares attracts, engages, and retains colleagues, customers, and collaborators profitably and sustainably. Today is a special day for many reasons. Today's conversation may open wounds. And please, I want to share with you, if you do have any issues that you want to talk about, please, here are some numbers I'd like you to take note of for Canada Mental Health Line, as well as the Indigenous Mental Health Line and the National Indian Residential Schools Crisis Line. Take a snapshot of that if anything triggers you today. When this event was scheduled, we didn't know about the unearthing of the tragedy of 966 unmarked graves. Many Canadians didn't understand the residential school's generational impact. We didn't know. We didn't know. We didn't know. We didn't know no longer is an acceptable response. Perhaps it never was, as the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the 94 actions told us. The call to justice can be overwhelming, but nothing's more overpowering than living with a truth that has been ignored by governments, institutions, businesses, and frankly, Canadian citizens for far too long. We need to understand our history and our reality. Today, Indigenous children disproportionately are in care, and adults are in the criminal justice system. There are high youth suicide rates and over 4,000 women and girls murdered and missing. There's increased homelessness and poverty. As a developed country, we can't seem to get fresh water to some reserves. And when Indigenous people enter the workplace and the healthcare system, they often feel vulnerable, unsafe, and dismissed. No wonder Indigenous peoples want to protect their communities from business seeking to establish themselves near or on a reserve. This Canada Day, I encourage you to reflect, learn, and appreciate, and most importantly, listen. Hold space to the truths that have been shared for decades and acknowledge the contribution of Indigenous peoples and their communities. I hope you will join me on that journey. You're here, which means you are open to learn, listen, ask, and ask. Today, the last day of Indigenous History Month, we'll be focusing on how to make your contribution count as a citizen, as a small or mid-sized business owner, and as a community leader. And we have 3 generous experts and community leaders to guide us on that journey. I'd like to invite Jenny to come on stage and to introduce herself.
Miigwech Suzanne and Miigwech Gary. Waje, Nila Miko Asenik. I'm Jenny Sutherland Shawanak. I'm Omashkegowak from Moosonee Lilu, the Moose Cree First Nation. And I'd like to acknowledge that I'm on the unsurrendered and unceded territory of the Algonquin here in Ottawa, Ontario, who are the traditional land and water stewards of this territory. I am an Indigenous healer, psychotherapist, mentor consultant, workshop facilitator through my private practice, Redstone Snake Woman. I also own and operate Missouri Relations Healing Lodge, in which I prefer to call myself the caretaker. And I'm a feather keeper, and most importantly, a mama bear. It's an honor to be here.
Great to have you with us today. I now want to introduce Sarah. Sarah, would you do the honors of introducing yourself?
Anin Gahandi Kwe Shishiwabek Nadishnakas Makwadodam Ramadonshnaba My name is Sarah Cunningham. My spirit name is Gahandikwe Shishiwabek. I am Bear Clan from Rama First Nation with roots from all over Northern Ontario and pretty much across Turtle Island. And so Chimigwech for being with us here today.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Sarah. And Gary, do you have anything to add to your introduction?
It's just a great honor to be invited here to discuss some of the Indigenous issues. I am a songkeeper, and I want to give my hand out to all those people that continue hanging on, sometimes by the fingernails, about our languages, our culture, and our songs, those type of things. And we still have them, and we're just now rediscovering them in a way that we can add technology and just to unravel these stories and songs that exist for thousands of years. So it's a very exciting time to be Indigenous, and we'd certainly like to share some of the dualities of life that we face constantly in our lives, and share that with people to how we navigate our way through time and space and work and all that stuff. Great. I'm happy to be here. John means it's good. I'm really well. Thank you.
It's wonderful to have you, Gary. It's nice to have people not quite coast to coast, but we're close. So it's wonderful. I'm going to start a question off with you, Sarah. When has your culture been a barrier to an opportunity?
When it comes to culture, there has been some barriers, absolutely, throughout time, even just to where to smudge, right? And especially working in mainstream. I've worked in many different nonprofit organizations as well as educational institutions. And so some of those spaces you're only allowed to smudge in one room, or you have to go outside. So there are definitely some barriers to where the culture isn't so much accepted. And we're now in this beautiful time of COVID where I have my smudge going right now. It's acceptable. I'm in my own home, in my own space, but also some policies and procedures that some corporations too, when we think about our traditional foods. And when it's a corporation, there's usually health and safety. You have to know vendors, and that you're only allowed to pick from. And so many of that actually doesn't have any of our traditional foods on it. And for it to be prepared in a good way as well, and especially when we're feasting and having ceremony, to share that with other people within our organization. And so those are some barriers that we have, that I've personally faced, but also working, it's been an amazing opportunity to be able to work with them to bypass some of those policies and procedures, and to also make space to ensure that even when a new building, whether it's in an educational or corporation, that there is a room where somebody can go in and smudge without having to run to your vehicle and smudge. So those are just some basic knowledge, and even logos. I have to say that we're the first ones here in probably Ontario to have our logos with work even changed to Anishinaabe, French, and English, to recognize the language here in Simcoe County. So those are small little factors that really we're changing, we're starting to see, and it's important to see the language as well, whether it's on the street, in the office, all of that stuff.
Thank you, Sarah. How about yourself, Gary? Can you give us just a short story of when you have felt your culture has been a barrier to an opportunity?
I don't know if there is a lot of barriers that I've attended in my life, and but I think the first consciousness and perils of the journey of my world was about when I was 6 years old. I got kicked out of my home into the streets. My stepdad kicked me out of there, and I had to hitchhike all the way back to my grandparents' way out in the bush. And then, by the time I got home, I was wrapped in around this idea of beaver peoples, the hunters and the gatherers that kind of protected me. And I started to draw ideas and help grandma make her moccasins by designing with ink and matchsticks on there. By the time I was in my early 20s, I started designing clothes nationally. Worked in Montreal for the Chateau years ago. So it's been more than 50 years I have talked about the duality of my life, because I've always seen two different worldviews. And just knowing about my ancient stories and songs, and I was very confused about why doesn't that reflect my reality? But internally, I saw completely different things, right from the stories of what I was told about these ancient transformation of animals and things like that. I became, what I understood was the opposite obstacles from these stories. So these stories, Saya was another cultural hero that I was told that I was like him. So I've always looked at that. But what I've really discovered that how do I overcome these obstacles? If there was racism that came and it was either you're going to fight or you're going to, but mostly we fought. And we had to fight in order to put our existence in that place. So I walked all through my whole life looking for references that reflected who I was. In a workplace, all kinds of different areas that I've worked in, mini industrialization, everything from drilling rigs to forestry, all kinds of things. Certainly lots of racism. Like I said, we always have to fight our way out of it and claim our place. So one of the things that was really challenging was the idea that our language was on the verge of extinct. And we realized how important that was. And a lot of times, even with residential schools and day schools, that's what a lot of my parents and a lot of my uncles and family attended, these day schools. And they were basically forced to beaten if they spoke the language, everything. But one of the things that was great about it, we always ran into the bush, so they could never find us. So lots of challenges. Today, that's what kept me going in my life, that I've always had something else in my mind, the stories that guided me. And whenever I get confronted with racism or abuse, I would be able to just go and try to present that in a way that people would appreciate it. But I think being an artist, it helps, because I've always created music and play guitar, and people always like that. So that kind of give me some leverages to and create a space that is more enjoyable. Challenges, certainly, we definitely today stand up to any bullying and all kinds of stuff like that.
Thank you for that, Gary. Duality is something I think probably all of you can, based on your stories that you've shared with me, can appreciate. Jenny, can you relate to that whole duality?
Absolutely. As a biracial Indigenous woman too, I often find myself existing between the worlds. But carrying on what my fellow speakers were speaking to, as an Indigenous woman, I've noticed where the barriers come up the most for me are in regards to cultural sensitivity, issues around cultural competency. And I've been working in the field of child welfare for 20 years, and it's just a very Eurocentric mindset, and it just doesn't work, and it's not helping or supporting our youth. And, issues surrounding worldview, Western worldview versus Indigenous worldview are completely different. And for so long, we've been forced to assimilate into Eurocentric worldview, and it doesn't put the community first. It doesn't recognize fundamental values and the foundation in which our children need to be growing up with family and community and culture. And so I find that the biggest barrier, just not being able to really have the same conversations because we come from such different worldviews. And really, I'm hoping, the ministry and everyone moves to Indigenous worldview, because it's the only way that it can work, is if we all work together as the community that our youth need. The other big thing that is about land. Unless we can all have the same conversation that she is a living, breathing entity that we refer to as mother, we can't quite have the same conversations either, in terms of just how we treat her. I find it very difficult being in organizations that don't recycle, as just a small example. That's the hardest for me. And meetings in organizations, we have a talking circle that we use, and it comes from a very humble approach. And I find often, because organizations don't use that, whoever has the stick speaks, it's very loud, and there's a lot of interruption, and people don't give the space to truly hear everyone and give equal space to listen to everyone. And I feel like we often try to listen to answer a question as opposed to just listen to receive the information and hold space. And so it's just things like that I find to be there are a lot, they're barriers that come up often. Those are the three that stood out the most for me when you asked that question.
What's interesting to me is that all of you responded in an answer that was very value-based. And this sort of conflicting values, this is how Indigenous people, what we celebrate, and there doesn't seem to be room for my value system in the colonial workforce or patriarchal workforce. That's where you all went, which I find very interesting, particularly because values, I think, are changing. So Jenny, I'm going to come back to you because you started down this road, and I think it'd be worthwhile to share with everyone what social initiative that would benefit children in the Indigenous community, or values that should be instilled in the Indigenous community and that perhaps we as a society can benefit from.
Everyone should be aware of what the Native Child and Family Society is doing right now, especially with the information that's coming forward, to take initiative to start moving into what's in the best interest of our youth. Cindy Blackstock is a spearhead. She's got tons of things going on that people can get involved with. For me, what I do with youth in care is actually for non-Indigenous youth in care too. And it's a lot of traditional ceremonies that help children come home to themselves again on the land. Everything is very land-based. And the ceremonies are to help us work through our rites of passage and any identity-based issues that we have, which I think is worldwide in terms of just the collective too. And so any movement that takes youth outside to rekindle and help us remember the sacred connection that we have with the land, I think is the movement we need to be having right now to bring this nation, bring this world towards the peace and the peaceful relationships we're supposed to have with each other in all our relations.
Thank you for that. Now, Gary, the land is so important, and you live on a reserve and a counselor for a reserve. How does the reserve address the land differently than perhaps in places off the reserve?
I think one of the things that we've been doing over the last few years, many years, is to try to reclaim our cultural spaces, our land. And we have treaty land entitlement that we're dealing with, that thousands of acres of land was taken from us, and we're trying to get that back. And we're on the verge of settling this. So it's really exciting that after 40 years of fighting, we're close to see the light to not only get some of that land back, but also the resources to do it. On the other hand, we constantly take people and youth out to the land. We basically go off 4 major events. We have spring beaver hunt. Everybody goes out in the land, go hunting, and we have language programs, harvesting of animals and those type of thing. We also have, for 30 years, been working with the school district where all the kids, grade 4s, different age groups, come to our community to participate in cultural activities. So everything from making traditional moose hide to archaeological dig to drumming and dancing, and of course the bannock on the stick. I love it. Everybody loves the bannock on the stick, and language programs and drumming and dancing. So most of these kids are non-native kids, so just general public. We open that up to them to experience, give them the experience of what it means to be Indigenous. Sometimes it's not just in the mind, but it's also in the heart physically. You got to get out to do it. You can't tell a young kid, you can talk to them, but then they have to experience it. They have to feel it. And I think that's where we need to have more outdoor education program where kids can actually feel it. If we're talking about the importance of dance, when they go out and do it, we get like hundreds of kids dancing at once. It's an amazing feeling of kinship and love and all that. You create this space for these kids to just enjoy. We have lots of parents now that attended 20 years ago, the Doi days, and now they're parents and they're wanting their kids to attend that. So they actually come back to help support it through volunteerism. So it's really exciting to see that evolution.
To that, Gary, do you think that it would be worthwhile that in the education curriculum that be a requirement for young people to go to a reserve and experience what our Indigenous brothers and sisters, how they live. Do you see value in that as a policy or a principle?
Absolutely. We have the same program with cross-cultural training with industry groups and government. So we take them out on a hike, like a 20, 30-kilometer hike. You get to see some personal challenges with some of the people that don't really realize the importance of the land and how it is that when you get out there to do things, it's different than you can visualize it or you can mentally understand things, but you got to actually apply that knowing, whatever that knowing is. Let's figure it out and how does it work? Even just skinning animals or making dry meat, those type of things. When the kids are in there getting their hands dirty, and of course, at first they always go, ooh, it's dirty, whatever. But then once they get into it, it's amazing the feeling and the pride that they get by just helping out, carrying things for the elders or getting some water and running around. Being part of something greater than themselves is, I think, one of the most important things that kids need to understand, especially if it's a ceremonial thing. Just recently, we introduced it's an old tradition of drinking water out of a harvest moose goose wing. It's like making it into a straw, and then it was given to the boys so that they can drink water through that so that they can have a good voice. And it's amazing. And we do that to Indigenous people and non-Indigenous kids. And every kid would come and say, that was one of the most beautiful things that I experienced. So it's the experience of that knowing is what's important for younger people.
With so much we can be learning. Sarah, now you're working with women in the community, and what sort of social initiative do you think would benefit Indigenous women in the community?
I work with women and children and youth in mainstream and also within Indigenous as well. And so I think some of the benefits for our communities, our women are our natural, they're our caretakers, they are our nurturers, and to really understand the roles and responsibilities. And we all have roles and responsibilities. We have the 7 stages of life. So to have that true understanding of the roles and responsibilities throughout our lifetime as well. So some of those initiatives, especially cultural sensitivity training, but when our women, because I work a lot with women who have experienced domestic violence. And so a lot of that is healing, right? And it's the need to protect, but also we have to provide space to keep her safe, to provide security for her. It breaks my heart every time we get a call and we're full. It really does. And so through that work, I've been going into schools and doing the cultural sensitivity, but also in terms of violence prevention. So I'm against the whole bullying initiative. It's a label that, let's call it what it is. It's violence. It's a form of violence. So we need to start teaching our youth at a very young age what violence is, not bullying, because ultimately if they keep doing those forms of violence towards one another, it just becomes a pattern, right? Then they carry it into their adulthood, into their relationships, into their friendships. And so there's a lot of initiatives that we're starting to do that violence prevention piece that is very much needed. But we also need, before that violence, I pray every day and I challenge the youth, put me out of a job. I don't want to have to be doing this work. We should not have to have shelter, but we do, because the violence is continuing to our women and our children. And so also needing the men, because they traditionally are providers and protectors. They provide and they protect our women and our children and our community. So also having those kind men. I'm very fortunate I've raised an 18-year-old who's very kind. And so that gives me hope for the future, that those patterns of violence, and it goes back to culture, and that instilling those 7 grandfather teachings. Wisdom is to know knowledge, and love is to know peace. Respect is to honor all creation. Bravery is to face life with courage. Honesty is to walk with integrity. Humility is to accept yourself as a sacred being. And truth is to know teachings, is to know the truth. So having those basic grandfather teachings at an early age is so vitally important. I'll share a personal little bit. I am a Crown Ward. And so I call myself a princess of the queen, because by definition, I'm one of her children. And so even with that, I was very fortunate to come back to the reserve and sit with women to teach me my roles and responsibilities, and to gain that knowledge piece, to actually have that, to honor myself as a sacred being. And it's so vitally important for our youth to move forward in that way, and our children. So
thank you for that, Sarah. And I got goose pimples and my heart warmed and pumped heavily while you were speaking. So thanks for that. I'm going to come to you, Jenny. Although there are many, what do you think is one immediate policy or issue that needs to change to empower Indigenous peoples to reach their desired potential, particularly in the community? Is there an issue or policy that could assist Indigenous people to reach their desired potential?
That question just brings up something rather large, actually, because Canada should be aware of the tribunal that's happening right now. With Cindy Blackstock and the Assembly of First Nation filed a human rights complaint against our federal government for underfunding Indigenous youth in care compared to the funding that they receive from the non-Indigenous youth receive from the province. And in 2016, they were found guilty. But the government has yet to do anything about that. And actually, I believe I heard that they just appealed. And so they're spending billions on fighting us with this instead of rectifying this discrepancy. Indigenous youth make up half the youth in care, and we're, 4.9% of the general population. So if we're looking at policies and politics and that, I am absolutely cannot believe that can even exist in Canada and what this country is supposed to stand for. And so I feel like if there's enough people that are knowledgeable about that we would have the support needed to fight that forward. Yeah, so policies like that, because it's hard for me to look at my youth and say you're funded less, you're not worth as much dollars as non-Indigenous. So when you bring up something political policy-wise, that's the first thing that comes to mind.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
How about Gary, in the workforce? You collaborate with a lot of businesses. What sort of immediate policy or issue that needs to change to empower Indigenous peoples to reach their desired potential in the workforce?
I think number one is that we have to implement Article 31 of the United Nations Declaration, where it is what people said, that we Indigenous people have the right to use our own systems of knowing in order to execute the things we need to do. And the challenge we've been facing is those policies and procedures, especially if you're on a reserve. We still live on our Crown land, and that is one of the challenges in terms of Indian Act system, where everything has to be taken care of by the Godfather. But we need to move away from that. We have been doing this. We have developed an urban reserve so we can be part of the economic mainstream, because we live about an hour away from what some people would say the main civilization town. So just that transportation being out of there, opportunities are a mess. However, when we take action about asserting our rights to the land, companies and others have been waking up to this processes. So now we have all kinds of partnership. The reason why is because we're good, kind people. And we got to show that. That means you got to be kind. So kind, inclusive, and show that you are working for the people. As soon as people see those qualities, that the leadership is not self-serving, we are the servants of the people. Everybody wants to get involved. We have pretty good reputation in our territory here, where a lot of the corporations or companies that come into town to do development or business, they reach out to us to see what we can do to partner. And that to me is just it's our desire. We show a clarity to the vision and what do we value and what we're willing to do to work hard for it. And those kind of, I think, principles are what's needed, especially for the younger generation, to see that a lot of their leaders are working really hard. We work hard, and I think that's just a work ethic thing. Once we get that moving again, and we've been doing that for some time, a lot of young people are saying, oh, I want to be like that guy. I want to be like that. I want to make lots of money. I want to have a successful business. So we are going through a major transformation here in our lives in terms of looking at the policies that doesn't work and then get rid of it and put your own policy in it. And that's where responsibility and action comes into play for, especially for elected leaders. We're not self-serving. We all agree that we are the servant of the people, and we're going to implement to the best of our capacity to deal with government and industry, to provide some kind of training, programming, whatever we have available for communities. If they want to go to school, we want to make sure that they get the best rate and resources available to them. If they want to get into training, we will provide them. But it's got to be done in the context of cultural knowledge and wisdom. So we use dreamers' philosophies, which is really about dreaming ahead and creating prayers, and be humble to be able to set those up and allow people to come into to be part of it. Responsibility is about an action, right? As soon as we, instead of blaming government and industry and others, we got to look internally to ourselves and say, what do we really want to do and what we're willing to work for?
Thanks for that, Gary. I want to give Sarah an opportunity to answer the question either for community workforce, but I will ask it again, Sarah. Although there are many, what do you think is one immediate policy or issue that needs to change to empower Indigenous peoples to reach their desired potential, be it in the workforce or community? You can pick which one you'd like to answer. Oh, you're on mute there, Sarah. You lose the bet.
Sorry. That is a loaded question. There's so many different policies and procedures.
Which is why I went to one.
And so I think the one implementation that we really need to look at is the Native Women's Association of Canada. And in terms of the murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls, the inquiry report, the recommendations are beautifully, there's 19 themes. It's color coded to what municipalities, federal needs to do, and what as organizations and also First Nations can do to start implementing the protection of our women and our children across Canada. And so those recommendations, policies, procedures have been very much laid out. And the work that the Native Women's Association of Canada has been doing and continues to do is phenomenal. The resources, they've laid out a pathway system. So we all heard about the national inquiry and there was no plan. Now they want to do the plan. So they have already broken off and they've already laid out the plan here. I encourage everyone to really look at that in terms of what we need to do to move forward in order to protect our future generations and our women here in the community.
Great and wonderful. And I'm so glad you shared that, Sarah. I would like to give people a link. At the end of this session today, I've accumulated about 50 links that will help all of you with how you can work with, elevate, empower yourselves and Indigenous peoples. I don't think, Sarah, I have that link. So can you just say the name again? And I'll actually ask my co-chair, you can find the link so we can share it with everyone. What's it called?
Native Women's Association of Canada. And so they've actually just released it 2 days ago. It's called Safe Passage, I believe. And so it talks about the murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls. their stories, but also some resources, especially for industries. So if you're in hospitality, if you're in different sectors, it actually has resources that you can start implementing and to look at and to train your people to look at, whether it's, human traffic or anything that they could do, any policies that they can implement as well. So they just released it 2 days ago, and it's safe passage, I believe.
I will find it. And for everybody, if we don't find it to add in the chat box, we will have it on the list that we're going to give you at the end of this event that will be on my website. So there's a huge list there. Jenny, I'm coming to you. Thanks, Katja. Nice to see you again. And not see you literally, but I feel you. She has a question for you, Jenny. Can you share the name of the person who is challenging the government for funding?
Yeah, so Cindy Blackstock, she's the executive director of the First Nation Child and Family Caring Society here in Ottawa, and she does amazing work for Indigenous child welfare. Her with the Assembly of First Nations are the ones who filed the human rights complaint. And so Canada was found guilty, but all these years has not done anything to correct the discrepancy in funding. So it's a human rights violation that's happening currently today against Indigenous youth in care.
There's so much we non-Indigenous Canadians can learn from Indigenous peoples. Is there a forum or institution at which we can become more educated, not only about history, but about your earth-based practices? Thanks, Derry, for that question.
I think everyone needs to connect with the local territories that they're in. There's wherever they are, connect with your local tribal group, whatever it is, and just make an offering. I think that's the beginning of that relationship. It could be the Friendship Center, or it could be the tribal councils, or it could be the nations. It doesn't take much to find these groups that actually do some work, or do the work that like you're talking about, Native Women Association and others like that. And just to reach out and say, hey, you know what, our company wants to sponsor something. It's a simple thing as sponsoring a child to go to a camp. That is one of the most, I think, powerful thing that companies can do locally, or businesses can do, is just sponsor an Indigenous child to go to a camp just to experience something different. That's the beginning, right?
And to add to that, and I think it's really important too to acknowledge when you're asking something from an Indigenous person, even if it's for myself, I always have my same. And if you're asking for that knowledge or education, so even for myself, if I'm asking an elder for that knowledge or for that ceremony, to offer a tobacco tie, sema tie, in your left hand, we carry it in our left hand closest to our heart, to put what you're asking of them, your thoughts and your prayers to that, and then to offer that. So I just also, that sometimes doesn't happen, but I think more and more organizations and corporations and anybody is starting to really acknowledge that our way of asking for something. It starts with our sema.
So that kind of leads to another question here, is Indigenous worldview. Can you tell us more about that? I believe, Jenny, did you mention the Indigenous worldview?
Yeah, thank you, Sarah, for saying that. As a woman who gets bombarded by questions daily, the reason for that is things need to be in balance. Our Indigenous spirituality is bringing balance and harmony always. And so when you're asking for something, you should be offering something. That's the true, respectful, humble, and gracious way to establish a relationship. So yes, for Indigenous worldview, it's very much about community. It's very tied in our spirituality, very land-based. And our teachings, that Sarah brought up, the grandfather teachings, everyone should know them. And when I started creating my programming, I created myself an elders board, because I work throughout the province, to get to know the elders around the province, to get their feedback on what they thought the youth needed that were coming from their territories. And that was the first thing that they said, was the grandfather teachings, and get them out on the land. If you can do those, our medicine walks, take youth and help reconnect them to the land. So we're very tied into holistic healing, medicine wheel teachings, recognizing that we all sit in the sacred hoop and are connected in a space of equality. So it has to be extremely respectful. So I'm really glad, Sarah, that you brought that up, because a lot of people are asking, and there needs to be an exchange. We need to be able to hold space for each other. There's some big conversations that are happening now and bigger ones to come. And the move forward as allies is to be able to hold space for those really important conversations to happen, because there's a lot of racism and there's a lot of misunderstandings. And I love the way you opened the space today about this being safe, because we have to ask some really difficult questions right now, and we have to have some big conversations.
I'll ask this of Gary. So thank you so much for that, Jenny. Is the land still called a reserve?
Yeah, there's definitely a reserve established. However, there's traditional territories, which is what most Indigenous people look at their land as their traditional territory that's being passed on to generation and generation of places. We have places that are sacred. So just in terms of worldview, my understanding and how I could articulate the idea that that means that everything is alive. And with just even that understanding that everything is alive and everything's got a spirit, changes that relationship to what you're going to do. So that means you have to take extra caution if you're going to go out in the land to do something with it. You have to give some offering. When you take something, you got to give something back. And that's what colleagues are saying here, is that there is just not constant taking of things. And that's where the Western philosophy and Indigenous philosophy clashes because of that. So if we can change the narrative to that only après rata, that means everything is alive, then we can have respect for human beings and animals and all the nature and the ecosystem of it, that everything is connected. And I think the best example of that is a spider web. A spider web is known worldwide, that everyone knows that relationship to the web, and we are part of the web of life. And then if we take too much of it, or it becomes distorted and it breaks. So this is what we're witnessing due to the industrialization of everything. Now we're going through about 4 generations or industrialization, and it's just more and more. So sooner or later, it's going to stop, because there's nothing infinite forever. Everything's got to change. So that's what a lot of the Indigenous people have been saying for many years, that in some areas, just leave it alone. Just leave it alone. Let it time to regenerate.
As I'm listening to each one of you, and these are practices that through, be it meditation or the Eastern philosophies, the mindfulness that we talk about. I talk about feminine power, which is like the divine feminine or sacred feminine. All of these things that have been in the Indigenous culture for centuries are now coming to the awareness of the West. And my question to you all before we take a break, and it's a big one, do you think the Western world, the colonial world, is really ready now more than ever to embrace the Indigenous practices as part of the way forward to a happier, more fulfilled, more respectful life? And I just added that, but you can change the words if you'd like. Would anybody, Jen, you're nodding, would you give your thoughts on that?
Sure, that made me very excited. This pandemic really put everyone on a timeout to think about that. As Gary said, the Earth right now has gotten an opportunity to start to repair herself. And everyone else has been forced to really reflect on how they've been living and how things need to change and go forward. There's no going back to the way things were. So right now we're already in a shift. Now with the discovery from the non-Indigenous communities about our babies, everyone is awakening to a collective story. And we are interconnected, as Gary has mentioned, with the eternal web of life. We are all so unbelievably energetically interconnected that everything we do, think, and feel influences one another. So it's time that we gather in that space and realize that to move forward in a good way is going to require every single one of us. We say in my language, Misawe ni wakamaganak, which is all my relations, which says that you're kin to me. So is the rock, so is the plant. We are all, and when we start to exist from that space, we start to see each other as, you know, the kinship and this powerful relationship. We stop playing bystander, we stop acting as strangers, and we start gathering as the community that we're meant to be. And so I feel right now, I feel the awakening. And as people are heading out to spend more time on the land, because that's in Canada, we've basically been, that's the only place we can really go right now with the COVID restrictions. Everyone's reconnecting with her again. And that's sacred feminine energy. That's the ancient voice of creation that is sacred and divine here. And we need her energy. I love people to reflect on Indigenous teachings and the idea of earthing and just realize that this energy is something we need to charge us, to revitalize us, to stand up and start doing what we need to do and moving forward. And it's very sacred. It's very feminine. It's women rising right now because we need to get back to a very heart-centered approach and what each other needs. And I'm loving it. A lot of women leaders, a lot of grandmothers. I give platforms to our elders, our grandmothers, the matriarchs. They come from such heart and such emotion and some fiery purpose. And so when you say sacred feminine energy rising, I'm seeing that. And it will push this nation forward into the healing space that it needs to be.
What is the tradition when you give a gift, and does it need to be tobacco? Sarah, do you want to maybe jump in on that?
Sure. It doesn't necessarily have to be tobacco, but generally for ceremonies and for knowledge, it is definitely, I do both. So that same in my left hand in a tobacco tie or a package of tobacco to my elder or to whether it's even a youth for that knowledge and those teachings, but it could also be money, it could be really anything, but it's to that balance of giving and receiving.
Now, changing gears a little bit, we've heard of cases where discrimination has been very prevalent in the healthcare system. And that's something that many Indigenous people have been living with forever. Have you seen it or have you heard it show up in the workplace? And if you can, share with us how discrimination has shown up in the workplace and what can allies do about that?
Yes, absolutely. So especially there is quite a bit of the discrimination in the healthcare system. I don't even know where to start. But even for birthing too, right? Like we had a fight to be able to bring our placentas home. Right? That in itself as women and that first kind of ceremony of that birthing is to bring that placenta home, to bury it. And there's a ceremony for that. When I had to fight for that 18 years ago, and then other women too with me, we had to be able to have them release our placentas to us for us to bring it home and to do that ceremony. So there's definitely discrimination in terms of some of the policies and procedures, as well as just the treatment of women and some of our children when they need assistance to it. Usually dismissed. We see a lot of discrimination in terms of our women that are going in who have been abused. There's only one hospital in Simcoe County to be able to actually treat her and go all the way to Aurelia to be able to get examined properly. But also there's still not even that space in some of the hospitals to be able to do the traditional healing that's needed for the family. Because when we think at the hospital, it's the beginning of life sometimes and the end of life. And with those two spectrums of life, we also need to acknowledge that ceremony as well. Also be able to give space for that healing to happen in that space.
Sarah, can you share, if you are an organization and you want to be more inclusive to diverse people, what is something that we can do for all cultures, but particularly in this case, the Indigenous peoples?
Absolutely. And so when I first started working in mainstream, and even a lot of my ceremonial was not being recognized. So I would have to take holidays or a sick day or a mental health day to be able to go and celebrate my solstice. So we have our winter solstices, we have our midwinter solstice, we have our summer solstice. Those are very important dates. I have not celebrated Christmas for about 16 years. It's not my belief. I don't believe in Christianity or that holiday. Same with Easter. That's very Roman Catholic, Christian, Anglican kind of beliefs. So I don't celebrate those. I don't celebrate Thanksgiving as well. So I've really boycotted a lot of that. But what I would really like is for me to be able to take that solstice off and prefer to maybe work on Christmas. And normally I do. Luckily, I have multiple hats that I am able to go in and help on those, whether it's Christmas Day or for that extra. So I think even that in itself is to acknowledge our ceremony and hunting season too, right? Most of us may have 2 weeks holidays, 3 weeks holidays when we first start with an organization, but that doesn't allow us to be able to travel home up to the north to be able to take that time to be on the land with our ancestors, our spirits, and also our families to be able to make that transition. Also, there's also full moon ceremonies. As a woman, that ceremony I need every month. That's where I also get my sacredness from, and to be able to acknowledge our grandmother moon and to be able to sit with other women. So those pieces too are huge to be able to incorporate, and then not to mention the fasting. So generally you could have a fall fast or a spring fast, and those generally will last 4 days. I usually need about a week off to prepare, and then when I come out of the bush, I need a couple of days to re-ground myself back into this modern world of ours, because I'm just very sensitive. I'm out of the bush after fasting for 4 days.
That's would be a real different perspective of an organization considering other people's holidays. And I think it's such an important one. So I really wanted you to share that. So thank you for that. Gary, if you are a counselor who will often facilitate collaboration with large and small businesses, can you provide non-Indigenous people with 3 strategies to promote a productive collaboration with the Indigenous communities?
Number one, what's the value? You got to look at the value, because if you're talking about business, at the end of the day, it's okay, there's a contract here. We need to address, what am I going to get out of this deal here? So a value, I think, is important. I think another one is just to be clear on what you want. We know a corporation, they want access and social license to operate on our land. So we know that. So we have to be then ready with a counter agreement and say, hey, you guys are going to come on your land. You're going to be able to generate this type of resources for your company. We need this in our community. It could be an elders lodge, or it could be a children's program, or sponsorship for youth, for hockey, or whatever the community's got to be clear to bring that to the table and say, what can we do to support our community programming issues that we are a shortfall? One of the things I notice is if it's clear, people are willing to justify it, right? So I think that is the number one thing. It's not mystery. It's very clear. Bring to the table what you need and say, based on our plan of action, here's what we got going on in terms of project development of whatever project it is. It's going to cost this amount of money to do it. And you coming on board to sponsor, this part will be good. So a corporate structure, they need to report it back to their decision making or their shareholders or whoever's make that decision. There got to be a sense of value to each other. And I think that's the key, and that's the communication we got to talk about in the boardroom. We love going there and laying down, Here's what I need, here's what you need, what can we do to empower one another to get that? As soon as we start talking in that context, it opens up all kinds of opportunities.
Fabulous. Thank you, Gary. And Jenny, now you work with youth and social initiatives. Curious, what would benefit this group, and how specifically could allies help the work that you're doing with youth?
The work that I do with youth is I'm bringing back what I call Indigenous treatment programming. So I started working for a non-Indigenous company. This is how it started. That was treatment-based in their services. And I said, you can't adequately serve a youth you don't understand. So that brought in workshops that educated on the history and current implications that Indigenous people face in this country. So that was the one thing, being informed, being able to understand the youth that you serve. The second thing was, if we're going to be treatment-based, then can we treat youth from an Indigenous perspective? Because I started working for the company as a psychotherapist, but I had the platform to now say, why are you not recognizing our elders? And let's elevate our traditional healers who have this profound way of healing to the same platform that our doctors in this Western world are given. And so I've been very blessed to be able to bring back our traditional medicine people to start creating sweat lodges for these youth to start going in for the healing and giving them opportunities for vision quests and getting on the land, getting access to language and medicine walks, and also reaching out to Indigenous artists and saying, look at this, it's not even revitalizing our art is huge, but saying, this is something our youth need to connect with. Could you teach this? And then they go, oh, yeah, I guess I can make it in a workshop. And then you see the youth and these adults start coming full circle with sharing culture and connection and tradition. And so I've been helping Indigenous artists start making a career for themselves in today's society with this beautiful medicine that we all would like to reconnect with. And so we also do this with the Pass the Feather, the Indigenous Art Collective of Canada, give a platform to our Indigenous artists, which has been huge right now this time of year with no powwows. We're all missing our powwows. So we've been creating these virtual market spaces and these virtual workshops to offer out to our youth and to other people who would like to learn about our beautiful crafts that have so much medicine in the teachings. And yeah, it's been being able to bring our ways to this Eurocentric platform, and then we can start pulling away from a space we've been forced to assimilate into and say, actually, we're reclaiming our space here. And guess what? Y'all need some of this too. So join us,
Which is fabulous. And one of the things too that people can do is buy Indigenous art as gifts for their clients. I have a beautiful piece of 5 women holding, I'm looking at it as I'm speaking to you. And it was the most treasured gift I had received during a year when I was a president, that the person really knew that would connect with me. And it's a great way to support an artist. So I recommend find an artist that you connect with and support them. And Gary will give you his phone number because he is quite the artist himself. Email. All right. On that note, one question left for you all. And this is a real short one. The last question is, Indigenous people will feel valued when Canadians blank. Who would like to go first?
I'll give it a crack here. I think the Canadian government and industry and the whole population, let's do business together. It's not just one-sided context here. Indigenous people are willing to work hard to be a good partner, certainly capacity and different things that can be brought forward in order to do business together. At the end of the day, that's what it's all about, and I really encourage Indigenous peoples. And if you look at all the businesses that's going on, we're talking billions of dollars of business that actually transpire right now. And it's going to even get bigger and bigger as a lot of Indigenous people finally finish their claims to some of the traditional territory and resources. Like I said, we are on the verge of that ourselves, and we're open to people to come in, provide service, like housing, for example, is a huge problem, healthcare, and there's lots of things that if you got a service, reach out to community and say, hey, what can we do to create more market or even change the market value? And once we do that, I believe that we'll get past all this rhetoric about who ownership and all this stuff going on. At the end of the day, we just need to create the resources for ourselves and for communities. And once people start put their head around that, we'll all be better off.
Thank you, Gary. So I will feel Indigenous people will be valued more by Canadians when blank, not blank. Sarah, do you want to give that a go?
Sure. I think when Canadians start to really value and start to understand the 7 grandfather teachings, but also for all of us, everything stems from violence. We need to end violence, not just here in Canada and against one another and within ourselves, but globally as well, because a lot of the issues right now, it has to do with violence and violations. So we really need to come to a place to end the violence.
Thank you for that, Sarah. Jenny.
Yeah, for me, the first thing that's come up is the 8th fire prophecy, understanding where we are at a time right now collectively. And I always speak to the land. We either continue down this path of destruction and materialism and destroy, or we gather on this red road together and we come together in unity and do what's in the best interest. We need to value our land. We need to value our children. Those are our 2 most precious resources that we have. And so everything else is not something we can sustain. Like, we can't live without our land. We need our children, our future leaders. Once we come from that space, that the values of that 8th fire prophecy, I think we will definitely head down the right path, the right road together.
Great. Thank you for that, Jenny. This has been a very informative, inspiring, and action-packed hour and a half. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart for taking the time and for educating once again. We need to do the work. And I've heard that so often. We need to do the work, particularly when it comes to the Indigenous peoples. The work has been done for us in the sense that there are tons of links that can give us insight to how to be an active ally, which is almost redundant because an ally truly is only active and never passive. So check out the links that we've incorporated on our site for your use to share. There are about 50 of them. They're broken out from a business standpoint, from artist standpoint, from media, from podcasts you should listen to. And of course, probably the most important list of 94 actions that we can do with truth and reconciliation, which I believe when I read last time, it's only 4 or under 10 have actually been done, but I think it's only 4. So by all means, there's even a letter there to write to your PM. So again, you can morph it the way you want, but there's templates there to do. So you don't need to be an activist to act. However, addressing unconscious bias takes conscious effort. So using your voice to amplify others' messages and voices of truth can introduce a new perspective, and in time, encourage people, organizations, and yes, government to act inclusively. During each panel, I remind us of allyship as an active, not passive, as I mentioned, and therefore an ongoing practice. Here is a short piece that I would recommend that you do take a photo of. It's coming up. There we go. Finally worked this time. This is a great way to really monitor yourself in solidarity. As a blank, this week I can work in solidarity with blank by blank. And of course, this month in the future. So as an example, as a settler, this week I can work in solidarity with Indigenous peoples by donating to the Indigenous Residential School Survivors Society. I thank Gary, Sarah, and Jenny. I cannot thank you enough for your generosity in sharing your experiences, but also perhaps even more importantly than your experiences and your expertise, but you shared your heart with us. And for that, we're grateful. I know as a Canadian, I have a lot to learn, but count on me to amplify your perspectives and voices. And until next time, make your contribution count for you, me, we.
I'll close with a closing prayer.
Thank you, Gary. I was coming to you, my friend.
Oh,
Okay,